Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. Today, as I sit here talking to you about a true crime case, there are many of you who in this very moment are in relationships with people that you don't necessarily feel safe with. Maybe there's physical abuse happening, maybe there's verbal or emotional abuse happening, and you're worried that it could escalate to physical abuse. Maybe you're telling yourself that he's going to change or it's going to get better. He's going through a hard time in his life. He lost his job or a close friend or a family member, and he's just having a difficult time processing it all. But when this time of his life passes, he'll be sweet again. He'll be kind again. And your life can go back to normal. Or maybe you have kids and you don't want to break up your family and take your children's father away from them. Maybe he told you that last time would be the last time, and you want to believe him because you love him. Maybe you've been with him for so long and he's become so ingrained in your day-to-day life, maybe even ingrained in your identity, that you can't imagine what your life would look like without him in it. You don't remember what your life looked like before he came into it, and that scares you. Change and the unknown scares you. Maybe you think he loves you, and maybe he's made you feel so unlovable that you believe if you left him, you'd never find love again. Nobody would ever love you again. And all of these things are completely understandable. I've personally been through them all. I've felt them all. There's no judgment from me. There's only compassion coming from me towards anybody who's in that position right now. And I know for a fact, just based on numbers and the law of averages, many of you listening to this right now are in that situation. And I care about you, and I want you to be armed with all the knowledge you can possess so that if one day you need to make what I know to be a difficult decision to leave, I hope that you'll feel strong enough and capable enough to do that. And you have the support that you need. But even if you don't have the support that you need, you know that I'm rooting for you, that we're all rooting for you. We're all in your corner. And I guess that kind of segues me into the mind-bendingly tragic case that we're talking about today, because it stands as an example for what might happen if a person doesn't get out of a relationship like this soon enough. And if the information in this video helps just one person avoid this fate, I would be happy with that. So on January 4th, 2023, 8 people were found dead inside of an Enoch, Utah home located at 4923 North Albert Drive. These people were 40-year-old Tasha Haight, her mother, 78-year-old Gal Earl, and Tasha's 5 children, 17-year-old Macy, 12-year-old Briley, 7-year-old twins Sienna and Aman, and 4-year-old Gavin. The final body belonged to Tasha's husband and the father of her children, 42-year-old Michael Haight. Michael had systematically shot his wife, her mother, and each of his children before turning the gun on himself in the middle of the night. There is evidence that he had planned this, and sadly, this tragic loss of an entire family could have been avoided multiple times by multiple people. Isn't that always kind of like the way it goes, you know? That's always the way it goes. Hindsight is 20/20, and hindsight gives us a lot of value. It gives us a lot of information. It doesn't save Tasha and her children or her mother, but hopefully it can save somebody else. But before we dive into this case, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Native. Native makes daily staples like deodorant, body wash, lotion, toothpaste, hair care, and skincare that are clean, vegan, and cruelty-free. And I love Native. You all probably know if you've been with me for a while, even if you've been with me for only a month or two, I love Native, and I've been using their deodorant and their body wash daily for years. And what I really love about Native's deodorant is that they're aluminum and paraben-free, and they use clean and simple ingredients that you know and love, like coconut oil and shea butter, but also the best best part is they give me up to 72 hours of odor protection no matter what I'm doing. For example, it's been unusually hot and humid where I live, like oppressively humid. And the other day I had to go out to a pretty isolated area and check out a location for a film. And I didn't really know that we were going to be hiking through bug-infested woods for 45 minutes to get there. By the end of our trek, I was covered in sticky sweat. Gnats were stuck to my sweat. I should have been smelling pretty ripe, but I had no issues. I actually smelled like grapefruit and bergamot, which is a great scent, by the way. And speaking of grapefruit and bergamot, Native has a huge range of scents to choose from, and there's something for everyone's taste. Whether you want the subtle sweetness of vanilla with the beachiness of coconut, or the calming salty breeze of sea salt and cedar, or maybe you prefer something sweeter and fruitier like sweet peach and nectar, whatever combination or scent you can think of, Native probably has something that will fit the bill, and they release limited edition scents all the time. These are just a few of my favorites. These are my summer scents. I call them my summer scents. They're the ones I kind of been wearing in the summer, but they're pretty awesome because we've got the grapefruit and bergamot, which is great, very fruity, but not overly sweet. And then blackberry and green tea that's a little bit sweeter, a little bit fruitier, but also super fresh smelling. And then buttercream and French vanilla, which I did not think I was going to like because I don't like the scent of vanilla. But this, listen, it smells like cake frosting. Better than cake frosting. It's amazing. It is amazing. I love it. So, additionally, the texture of Native's deodorants are never sticky. They feel dry when applying, and Native even has a sensitive range of their deodorants, which is a baking soda-free formula made instead with coconut oil and magnesium oxide. It's still vegan and it still gives you up to 72 hours of odor protection, but it's just more sensitive. So right now, if you click the link in the description box and use code StephanieH34, you can get 20% off your first purchase at Native. This offer is available site-wide, but only for a limited time, so do not wait. Stock up now. Once again, click the link in the description box and use code StephanieH34 for 20% off your first purchase with Native. Thank you so much to Native for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. Okay, let's talk about our perpetrator, Michael Haight. Michael Haight was born in Seattle in 1980. The following year, he moved with his family to Cedar City, Utah, which is 2 hours away from Overton, Nevada. And Overton, Nevada was where Michael's future wife, Tasha Earle, would be born and raised. After Michael graduated from high school in 1998, he spent 2 years in Brazil, fulfilling his mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And after that, he studied business at Southern Utah University, where he met fellow student Tasha Earle, who was working towards her bachelor's degree in child developmental studies. Tasha and Michael would get married in the St. George Temple on May 16, 2003, and the couple would go on to have 5 children together. This family would be very active in their church. They were Mormons. Tasha was a stay-at-home mother whose greatest desire in life was to teach her children love, kindness, service, and dedication to the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Michael worked as an insurance salesman for Allstate, and reportedly he had clients who would drive hours specifically to work with him due to his personal attention and eagerness to get them the best rates. The Haight's seemed like the perfect family. But, I mean, who is the perfect family, right? Because, as it turns out, behind closed doors, there were a lot of problems. Many people described Michael Haight as being a person obsessed with what others thought about him, his life, his family, and it was more important to Michael that everyone thought things were good than to actually work on things to make them good, right? And I'm sure we all know people like this. For at least the last 2 years, Tasha had been telling her husband, Michael, that she was considering divorce based on his controlling, manipulative, and sometimes abusive behavior. But it does look like, to me, in my opinion, these issues started very early on in the marriage, or at least there was some indication right from the beginning that Michael Haight had the ability to be a little unstable and maybe dangerous. So a woman who had lived next door to Tasha and Michael when they were newly married remembered that Tasha would often come over and ask for advice. This neighbor was an older woman who'd been married for some time. Tasha was younger, newly married. And, it is kind of common to ask older people, like, hey, Is this normal behavior in a marriage? Should this be happening? What was your experience like? And Tasha told this neighbor that Michael had some odd, I guess, idiosyncrasies. He would make her wash out plastic bags so that she could reuse them over and over again. And he would also make her cut baby wipes and cleaning wipes in half. Most likely this was to save money, right? That's what it seems like the initial purpose was. But also there is some controlling aspects in this. And if this case does not remind me of Susan and Josh Powell, I don't know what does. If you are not familiar with the Powell case, I have a series on it, a link in the description. But yeah, Josh Powell did the same stuff to his wife, Susan. And yes, they were Mormons as well. I see the parallels. I understand. But he did this to his wife, Susan. He was very controlling about what she spent. He was very controlling about what she could do. But he spent money on the dumbest shit. And he bought all this stuff that didn't matter. But he would prevent her from buying things that she and the family, their sons, needed. So if Tasha didn't do these things, like reuse the plastic bags and cut baby wipes in half, she would be in a lot of trouble with her husband if he found out about it. So clearly, in my opinion, Michael Haight had some issues with being controlling and domineering from the very start of this marriage. But it doesn't look as if things got really, really bad until the last few years. Or at least Tasha didn't become fed up and start wanting out until the last few years. I'm actually sure that things were bad the whole time and they just continued to escalate. Friends and neighbors of Tasha's and the Haight children have since come forward to report what was happening inside of 4923 North Albert Drive. Tasha served as the Young Women's President in her LDS ward, and a friend of hers who also served on the organization told police that she and Tasha would often talk about their marriages, sort of compare their marriages. This woman, we're going to call her Betty. Betty said that Tasha and Michael had a very rocky relationship, and basically Tasha was blamed for anything that went wrong in the marriage or in the family. There's also something in the police report that says Michael made Tasha feel inferior to someone, but that someone's name is redacted. However, if I was to guess, I would say the redacted name belonged to Michael's mother, Tasha's mother-in-law. There's lots of stuff throughout the police report that makes me feel this way. Also, I just know marriages. I know in-law relationships. I know how men become controlling like this and how men develop entitlement like this. And it usually comes from a mother who is inconsistent with her love and affection, who withholds or love bombs, and then the man grows up to kind of be in this way. If you look at examples, we've got Scott Peterson, Chris Watts, I could go on. But in the police report, it states that Tasha had recently set some boundaries with this redacted person, and this had not gone over well with Michael, and they argued. Once again, who is going to cause a man to argue with his wife? His mother, right? That's usually the only person that's going to come between a man and his wife. At that stage in the marriage. So reportedly, Tasha would also have friends over to her house, but she didn't like to talk inside of the house because she was worried that her husband was somehow recording her. And friends would often go to Tasha's house to help her with the cleaning and the dishes so that she wouldn't get yelled at by Michael when he came home from work. Because if he came home from work and the house wasn't picked up and the dishes weren't done or Tasha hadn't done her chores for that day, he would be very upset and apparently verbally berate her. But when these friends were over helping Tasha, they would always have to talk very low and quietly just in case they were being recorded. And Betty also said that whenever Tasha would text, she would do so in short, positive messages just in case Michael was somehow reading her messages. And I believe that he was. I honestly believe he may have been recording her and probably was also reading her messages. And the reason I feel this way, once again, I've been in relationships like this. I know how it feels when your husband starts telling you things and he's like, well, I know that you're saying this to this person and I know you're doing this and I know you're saying this. And it's like, how does he know this stuff? He must be spying on me, stalking me, recording me, somehow monitoring my communication with others. And who does that? A controlling person. And it seems that Michael Haight had become incredibly controlling with his wife and his children. And it was especially important to him that he monitor and control who they interacted with, because he wanted to make sure they weren't talking negatively about him and, by default compromising his reputation, which he wanted his reputation to be, look at me, I am this amazing insurance agent that gives the best service to the point where people will drive hours out of their way to give me their business. I am an amazing family man. I provide for my family. I'm an amazing husband. I'm a holy person. I go to church or temple or whatever, and I'm very, active in my community. That's how he wanted to be seen, but he couldn't be seen like that if his family was disclosing what was happening behind closed doors to the public. Michael was known to take away Tasha's car keys and cell phone to prevent her from leaving or from talking to anybody. And it was also reported that Michael had recently purchased a GMC Yukon, and he told the salesperson who sold him the car that he was going to put it into storage, and he would only let his wife drive the vehicle when she deserved it. And most of Tasha's friends knew that Michael acted one way when they were around, all helpful and kind, and another way behind closed doors, and they knew he was performing. For instance, one day, Tasha was out on the front porch with one of her friends, and the kids were on the front porch, like the younger kids, and Michael came out, and he was like, okay, I need the kids. It's time for a prayer session. I'm going to take them inside the house, and we're going to hold hands and pray and do this prayer session. And when Michael took the kids inside, the friend said that Tasha kind of laughed and was like, he's never done this before. Like, this is not a thing he does. And Tasha and her friend both kind of laughed about like how this was just one big performance for the benefit of the person who was there, so that this person would then go out into the world and be like, oh my goodness, Michael Haight, what a man, what a holy man, what a man we should all look up to, taking his children into the house for a prayer session in the middle of the day. Like, nobody is better than him. That's what Michael wanted. That's what people like Michael want. Michael was specifically controlling with money, which is a trademark sign of a controlling abuser, because he was the main and only breadwinner, and so he was able to dictate how much money Tasha was allowed to spend. So there's several instances of this listed in the police report that officers gathered from people who knew Tasha and Michael. So for instance, there'd been a time when Michael had given Tasha $300 to spend on groceries for the week, but she'd also spent an additional $30 at Walmart because she had to purchase a rug to replace the rug in their kitchen that had become damaged. When Michael found out that she had spent this extra $30, he was enraged, and he told Tasha that she shouldn't have gone over the budget, no matter what, that she should have put something back while food shopping, like put food back, so that she could have bought the rug without going over that $300 budget. Tasha had also been very proud of herself because during Christmas of 2022, Michael had only given her $100 per child to spend on gifts, and Tasha felt that she'd been able to put together a nice Christmas for her children despite this tight budget. But she'd been a little annoyed about a couple things. First, she'd been kind of disappointed that Michael hadn't purchased any additional presents for the children. And she also was annoyed because Michael, right before Christmas, had just gotten a big check from Allstate, like a bonus check or something. Tasha had seen it on the counter, and so she's like, why are you acting like we don't have money or we can't, splurge a little bit for our kids for Christmas when I know you have money? When the kitchen table became worn out, Michael told Tasha it was her fault because she couldn't control their kids and he wasn't going to pay money for a new table. So Tasha decided to, solve this problem herself. She decided to go out and get the stuff to refinish this table for herself in one afternoon by herself. And honestly, props, because I always want to do stuff. I've wanted to refinish furniture and sand it and polish it and finish it forever, but I just don't have the balls to start because I feel like I don't have a great attention to detail and I would mess this up. But she did it. She did it. And when Michael got home and saw her work, he was not proud of her. He was not pleased that she'd fixed the table and saved him money. He was angry because he hadn't given her permission to do so. And this is very uncomfortable for me to talk about. Oh, it's very uncomfortable. This is a hard one for me. So Michael was giving Tasha a small allowance each month, very small. And apparently she eventually started just saving up her allowance because she knew that one day very soon she was going to have to file for divorce. And in case anybody's wondering, divorce is ridiculously expensive. Doesn't matter if you're wrong or right, doesn't matter if you're the victim of abuse, it is still going to break you. It's ridiculous. So anyways, friends of Tasha's claim that it was the summer of 2022 when Tasha started to really become stronger and sort of like break free. It was the point where she said, I cannot any longer allow this man to affect the way I feel, to continue to stress me out, to continue to put me down. I have to just like start doing things for me. Tasha had been in therapy for a few years. She'd started losing weight. She was getting her nails done. And her husband, Michael, didn't like any of this. He didn't like that she was changing her appearance. He accused her of losing weight because she was cheating on him. And he shamed her for paying $25 a month for her nails. He was like, where do you have the money for this? Like, how can you justify this expense, this $25 a month for your nails expense? And Tasha told Michael in very simple terms, I'm not doing my nails for you. I'm not losing weight for you or for any other man. I'm doing it for myself because I want to feel good for the first time in a long time. And during this time period, an incident happened that let Tasha know it was time to end her marriage with Michael Haight for good. So the entire family had been sitting in the living room reading scriptures after church one Sunday, and 12-year-old Briley had been fidgeting with a charging cord while she listened, as children do, as adults with ADHD do, right? You can't have me sitting and listening to something and not fidgeting with something. And yeah, it annoys people around me for sure. All the remote controls for like TVs, the battery backs have all been broken off and had to be electrical taped on because I just pull them off and put them back on, pull them off, put them back on. I mean, no ill intent. I'm not trying to annoy anybody. I'm not trying to piss anybody off. But while Briley was doing this, her father, Michael, ordered her to stop. But Briley continued to play with the cord, causing Michael to stand up and start screaming at his wife, Tasha, telling her that they had the worst kids in the world, the most awful, the most disrespectful kids. And then he screamed at Tasha that she was fat and ugly and a terrible mother. And Tasha looked around at her children, and she realized that none of them had even flinched. They didn't seem upset. They weren't crying. They weren't running out of the room. They were so used to Michael's explosive and abusive behavior that they were completely unfazed. And that's when she knew she had to start preparing an exit strategy. So Tasha began meeting with an attorney, James Park, and she had him draw up divorce papers in December of 2022. But she requested that he not serve her husband, Michael, with these papers until after Christmas, which once again is probably a level of grace that Michael Haight didn't even deserve. The papers were served to Michael at his Allstate insurance office on December 27, 2022. And on that day, Tasha made sure that her children were at a neighbor's house in case Michael came home in a rage. Instead, Tasha would later tell her friends and her lawyer that Michael reacted very oddly to being served with divorce papers. He called her, and he was all calm, and he was like, "How's your day going?" And Tasha was like, "Fine. Did you get any papers today at work?" And Michael said he had, and he assumed that they were divorce papers. And then he calmly told Tasha to be out of the house by the time he got back from work, but she was not to bring the kids, right? They would be staying with him. Now, Tasha did leave that day. She ended up staying with her mother, Gail, for the weekend, but she brought her 5 children with her. Obviously, she's not going to leave them in the house with him. And reportedly, Michael showed up at Gail's house several times that weekend and tried to convince Tasha to leave with him, to go for a drive and talk. But Tasha told him that she had a terrible feeling she should not go anywhere alone with him, and then she shut the door in his face. Once again, this strikes very close to home for me. I've been in this situation. I've been in the situation where the person who's been abusive is like, let's talk. I just want to talk. I understand. I take accountability for everything. Let's just take a drive with me and talk. And there is something instinctually in me screaming, like in the pit of my stomach, like, do not go with this person. If you've ever been in this position, listen to your instincts. Listen to that voice inside that's screaming. Listen to anything in your body that feels unwell or not right, because your body is trying to tell you something. Your lizard brain is trying to tell you that you're in danger. So Tasha and the children ended up returning home Saturday night. They all attended church as usual on Sunday, but Tasha wouldn't allow Michael to sit with his family, and he ended up sitting a few rows back during church. And honestly, I feel like this probably triggered him more than being served with divorce papers. Michael was very angry about this because he felt basically on display, right? He felt not sitting with his family during church was an embarrassment, and everyone was watching and everyone was talking about it, and it threatened his public image. And to be honest, knowing church people, no offense to anybody who's a church person, but, they're very tight-knit communities. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone's in everyone's business. They probably were talking about it. They probably were gossiping. What's going on with Tasha and Michael? Because people love to, for some reason lately, communities, instead of being there to support each other, to help each other through things, they love to talk about like, oh, this couple's having problems. What's happening? What's going on? Ooh, gossip, gossip, gossip. It's gross. And being a part of this church, being a part of this community, Michael most likely knew that's exactly what was happening, and it threatened his public image. It made him feel very insecure, very angry, and he blamed Tasha for this, right? Because she's orchestrating what he believes to be a devastation of his reputation. A neighbor of Tasha's who talked to her every day reported that Tasha had confided in her that she was terrified that Michael would do anything, whatever it took to protect his reputation and make sure that they appeared to be the perfect family in public. And Tasha had also told friends and family about some strange movements Michael had been making after being served with divorce papers. First of all, he'd refused to move out, even though everyone was telling him to move out, even his attorney, allegedly. So Michael had been living in the spare room in the basement, which was used as an exercise room, and he was sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor. Tasha also said that each of their children had about $20,000 in savings accounts, and Michael had removed that money, but she didn't know why. And most alarming, Michael had also removed all the firearms from their house, including the hunting rifles that Tasha had inherited from her father and the handgun that she kept in the nightstand drawer next to her bed for protection. Tasha's sister, Jenny Earl, has since stated that both her sister, Tasha, and her mother, Gail, were trained in firearm safety and personal protection. They knew how to use guns. They knew how to shoot guns. They were well practiced. They knew how to do it safely. And Jenny, Tasha's sister, feels that Michael removed all the weapons to leave Tasha and her children and mother completely vulnerable, with no way to protect themselves against what he planned to do. And I agree. I know that there are a lot of shouts for gun control, and I definitely agree with that. But I will say also that a firearm for a woman is the great equalizer. And sometimes it's all you can do to protect yourself against a man who, no matter what you do, will always be bigger and stronger and more violent than you. Most likely, Tasha didn't think this was a huge red flag. Maybe she did. I don't know. We can only go by what she told friends and family and her lawyer. And basically, she told these people, yeah, Michael's been mean and cruel, but I don't think he would ever actually hurt me or our children. And I mean, honestly, Michael and Tasha had already separated once back in September of 2021, and he hadn't done anything too unhinged at that point. It seemed like he kind of was being more cooperative in the fall of 2021 when they first separated. During that time, Michael moved in with his mother for a bit, and Tasha told him that if he wanted to return home, he would be required to go to counseling and start helping out with his children. And Michael did go to counseling, just long enough to pacify her, though, right? Just long enough to show oh, look, I'm doing it. I'm doing the work, but not long enough to make any real change, obviously, because here we are. That obviously didn't work, and he probably didn't go there to open himself up and get help. He went there to just show Tasha that he would, and then so she would let him come back home. Tasha confided in her friends that even though Michael wasn't, the best all the time, she loved him, and she felt she'd made a commitment to him, her marriage, and her family, and she wanted to honor that commitment at all costs. If there was any way to save this marriage, she wanted to be able to do that. But Tasha also relished in the peace that she felt without Michael around, telling one friend, quote, "Without Mike here, my house is a dream. Everything is so smooth," end quote. Like I said, Michael agreed to go to therapy, and he moved back in, and for a while the situation seemed to improve. But another friend compared Tasha Haight to a frog in boiling water. The tension would continue to build in the home, but because it was so gradual and subtle, Tasha wouldn't even know she was in trouble until it was too late. The boiling frog syndrome is based on, I guess, an urban legend describing a frog being slowly boiled alive. And the whole premise is that if a frog is suddenly thrown into a pot of boiling water, he'll jump out to save himself. But if the frog is placed in lukewarm water and the temperature of that water is slowly and gradually raised, the frog's going to keep adjusting to the slightly warmer water. He's going to say, oh, this is kind of warmer, but I can handle this. It's not too bad. He won't perceive there's any danger, and by the time he figures it out, it's too late, and he no longer has the strength or the capability to jump out and save himself. I think it's very indicative of how bad things were in the house when we see how happy the children were that their mother had finally decided to divorce their father. And I mean, usually in a lot of situations, kids aren't happy about a divorce. Or they're like they hate the fighting, but they still don't want to see their father leave. They hate the fighting and the tension, but they still want their parents to be together. They're not usually just like cheering for their father to get the hell out. But in this case, these kids were clearly feeling the stress and pressure of having Michael Haight around, and they wanted him gone. They were cheering for him to get out, especially the two older girls, 17-year-old Macy and 12-year-old Briley. Briley had been texting with one of her friends that her father had been stealing money out of their accounts and removing guns from the home. And on December 17th, 2022, Briley texted this friend the word help with almost, 20 exclamation marks. The friend asked, "Are you okay?" And Briley responded, quote, "No, but I wish I could tell you about it, but I can't. Sorry. I just needed to say that." End quote. On December 27th, 2022, Briley texted her friend again asking if it was a good time to talk. They chatted for a bit, and Briley's friend told her that she was sending her lots of love, and Briley responded, quote, "Thanks so much. Heaven knows I'll need them. I also plan on going through my emergency chocolate stash." End quote. The next day, on December 28th, 2022, Briley texted her friend again saying, quote, "Yeah, so my dad asked what he's done. So I reminded him about all the insults and the names he's called me, and he played dumb. How can he not remember calling his daughter a failure and a disappointment on her 8th birthday? I hate him." End quote. On December 29th, Briley texted her friend excited that she was not going to have to move out of her house. And this probably stems from Michael refusing to move out, and so probably Tasha at one point told the kids, like, well, if he doesn't leave, we're going to have to leave. But then maybe Michael said he would move out. I'm not sure. But either way, Briley was excited that she wasn't going to have to leave her house. And on January 3rd, Briley was with one of her friends from church, and she told this friend that she was happy her mother and father were getting divorced, but Michael was now again refusing to move out, even though everyone had told him to, even his own lawyer. Briley also said that she'd recently purchased some new books, and if her father found out about them, he would be upset. Once again, this is controlling behavior. I don't think that Michael was mad that Briley was reading. It was probably more along the lines of what she was reading. You know, if he's supposed to be this huge Mormon, like this devout Mormon, then maybe he wouldn't want her to read some of the stuff that like young adults would read. He would find it to be inappropriate, whatever, but she wanted to read that stuff. That's controlling behavior when you try to control or limit what your 12-year-old child can read, especially if it's not like adult material, if it's just like YA stuff or just like normal stuff, but it doesn't have like a religious intonation, that is controlling behavior. Briley's sister, 17-year-old Macy, had also spoken to a friend on January 1st, 2023 at a New Year's Eve dance at their church, and she said that Michael was being a jerk again and her mother was finally divorcing him and she couldn't be more excited. Macy texted another friend saying, quote, "He needs to go. My dad keeps love bombing me. He will not leave the house. I just want him to go." End quote. And it seems that Macy Haight had good reason to not trust her father, Michael, and to not want him around. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. At around 3 a.m. on January 4th, 2023, a next-door neighbor of the Haight's woke up to use the bathroom. As she was walking down the hall, she heard a bang, followed quickly by another bang, bang. After a slightly longer pause, she heard another bang, and then again, bang, bang. Now, this woman was irritated. She thought someone was setting fireworks off, and it was far past the time and the date when fireworks would be allowed or acceptable for New Year's Eve. Hours later, at 11:02 a.m., Enoch City police officers arrived at the Haight home to perform a welfare check after Tasha had missed an appointment that morning. and she wasn't answering her phone. Police wrote in the report that no one had answered the door, and it didn't appear that anyone was inside the home because no noise could be heard. At 1:50 p.m., another welfare check was requested, but this time it was requested from Michael Haight, who, it was reported, had been acting strangely for several weeks, and that morning, his Ford F-150 had been found parked outside his parents' house in Cedar City. At 2 p.m., police returned to the Haight home, but left once again, writing in the report that the house was secure and nothing was visible through the windows. Between 2 and 3:50 p.m., both Enoch City PD and Cedar City PD made multiple attempts to try and locate the family. They found out that Michael hadn't shown up for work to his Allstate office, which was in Cedar City. He'd missed several appointments, which was very unlike him, and he'd left a few personal documents on his work desk, specifically his secretary's paycheck and living trust paperwork. It was also discovered that none of the 5 Haight children had made it to school that morning. At 4 p.m., a person who was apparently a neighbor and a friend of the Haight's, as well as part of their congregation, heard that no one could get a hold of Tasha and the kids. So this guy entered the Haight home through an unlocked door in the garage. And, what he found was obviously shocking. And then he called 911 and he asked for the police to come back because he'd walked in and kind of one of the first things he'd seen was a dead body laying on a bed with blood near it and around it and on it. So the Haight house is a single-family residence with a main level and a basement. There's 3 bedrooms on the main level and 2 bedrooms in the basement, as well as that bonus/workout room where it appeared Michael Haight had been sleeping since his wife filed for divorce, or maybe even before. Now, inside this house, throughout these 6 rooms, police found the bodies of the entire Haight family, as well as Tasha's mother, Gail, who had apparently been staying with her daughter for safety reasons, to protect Tasha from whatever Michael would do or to just be there as a witness in case Michael did anything. Each of the victims had at least 1 gunshot wound to the head. Some of them appeared to have been shot multiple times. 40-year-old Tasha Haight was found in bed next to her mother, Gail. Tasha was lying on her back, partially covered by sheets and blankets, and police found a large amount of dried and pooled blood surrounding her head on the pillow. Her mother, Gail Earl, was dressed in a purple nightgown and LDS temple garments. She'd been shot in the forehead above her left eye. Police found several bullet fragments at the scene, including in the pillowcases underneath Tasha and Gail's heads. 4-year-old Gavin Haight was found laying on the floor of this bedroom. His head was on a pillow, partially covered by blankets, with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. Gavin was dressed in blue pajamas with monkeys on them, and he was laying on his back with his hands tucked behind his head, like this. So the police report states that there were corresponding deficits in Gavin's face, the back of his head, and the back and palm of his right hand. All of these deficits, wounds lined up, and a bullet fragment was found in the pillow under his head, which I take to mean that he's laying on the pillow, his hands behind his back like this. His father shoots him here. It goes through his hand and the pillow. 12-year-old Briley Haight was found in the top bunk of a set of bunk beds in her room. She was lying on her left side, her head on a pillow, partially covered with a blanket, wearing a red t-shirt, black yoga pants, and orange and gray socks. She had also been shot in the head. Her sister, 17-year-old Macy, was also found in bed, her head on a pillow, mostly covered with a blanket, her left leg hanging off the bed. She'd also been shot in the head. 7-year-old Sienna appeared to have been asleep when her father shot her in the head. She was covered in sheets and blankets, not partially, but fully, as if she was tucked into bed, and she was dressed in a long-sleeved purple shirt with pink and white heart-patterned pants. But Sienna's twin brother, 7-year-old Iman, appeared to have gotten the worst of it for some reason, and for the life of me, I can't imagine why. Iman also had bunk beds in his room, which was located in the southwest corner of the main floor of the home, but he wasn't found in his bed. Iman was found on his stomach on the floor in the corner of the room, sort of between the corner of the room and the bunk beds. He was wearing black, white, and red Baron Moose print pajamas and white socks that had blood on the bottom of them. The wall behind the bed had blood spatter on it, consistent with the shot originating at the head of the bed, right? So, for instance, I'm I believe Aman was probably at one point in bed with his head on the pillow, and then his father shot him. And that's where you see the blood spatter on the wall. But that's not where it ended, because there was also a large amount of blood near the ladder, or the stairs. They call them stairs and ladder interchangeably in the police report, but the stairs, which would allow you to get from the top bunk of the bunk beds to the ground. And this blood continued down the stairs. Blood was found on both the top and bottom of Aman's socks. The blood on the top of his socks was consistent with void patterns in the bunk bed stairs, and there were little footprints in blood that matched Aman's feet. There was also blood smear on one step that was consistent with the bottom of a small child, and sure enough, on the rear area of Aman's pajamas was a blood smear. Aman was found face down on the floor in what was described as an army crawl position with a gunshot wound to the back of his head and a large amount of blood pooled around his head. Under further inspection, when Aman was moved, police found there was a corresponding wound between his eyes as well as to the left side of his head near his ear, and obvious damage to the mouth area. When the bedding was searched, police found whole teeth and numerous teeth fragments. There was also teeth and teeth fragments located next to Aman's body on the floor, and projectile fragments had been removed from his bedding and the wall behind his bed. I can't say for sure what happened here, but it looks as if Aman was shot twice by his father, but he survived. And in pain and confusion, he attempted to get down the stairs from his top bunk to get help, but he didn't make it far. You know, when they say the void patterns matched the top of his socks, it means that for a while he was standing up and bleeding from his head wound. The blood was, which it's copious amounts of blood because it's head wounds and he's been shot twice in the head, was, dripping down. But the blood that was landing on his socks wasn't landing on the floor, so there would be void patterns, like areas where there's no blood because they landed on his socks instead of the floor. I think the teeth fragments probably come from the shot to his head behind his left ear, like by his left ear, because your jaw is here, your teeth are here, and probably when he got shot there, that is what would cause the teeth and the teeth fragment to come out. I don't know why Michael would have shot the 7-year-old child twice. Was the first shot to the face to be like torturous, and then he shot him in the head? Did he shoot him the first time in the face, and that was what caused Aman to still be alive, and when Michael realized that he was still alive and still walking around, he came back and finished the job? I don't know. And we'll probably never know. But I don't know why. I don't know why this happened to this poor little boy. Michael Haight was found in the exercise room, lying on his back on top of his little sleeping bag with a .40 caliber pistol between his legs and a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. Michael had shoved wads of tissue paper into his ears, reportedly to muffle the sound of gunfire, but probably also to muffle the sounds of his family pleading with him if they were even aware of what was happening. And there was a handwritten note next to his body. Now, given Michael's religious beliefs, given the fact that he's, a human, you might think this note would say something like, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I couldn't lose my family. I had to take them so we could all live eternally in the kingdom of God and so that they could never leave me." Because, that's what Mormons believe, like that you get married and you're all sealed together in a temple. And so even in the afterlife, you'll all live on together. But no, that is not what the note said. Instead, Michael blames everything on Tasha, who he describes as being manipulative and abusive. Quote, "I have worked my whole life for the ideal of an eternal family. I've been an honorable, good man who has tried to do my best to provide for my family. I've seen the texts and emails with all the backbiting and gossip about me and my family. I cannot believe that God has allowed the person who should be closest to me in the world to fault find, gossip, and disparage me at every turn. I've never seen someone who is so intent on finding faults in others. I've tried helping, but it generally backfires, and I seem to always get blamed. I would rather rot in hell than to put up with another day of this manipulation and and control over me. I've been complained about every step of the way, that I work too much, put my church calling before my wife, and on and on and on. She's been so awful to me and my family for years, and I've generally been patient trying to work through her issues with my family, our kids, neighbors, ward members, and others who don't make her the center of attention. This is nonsense, and I can't handle it for one more day. We will not be a burden on society. I kept asking for help, and you wouldn't listen." End quote. So a controlling abuser does get mad and lash out when they lose control over their victim, like when their victim files for divorce. And the compulsion that the controlling abuser will have is to do something, anything, that will put the control back in his hands. In the police report, one of the police officers writes that as he was going through the home and seeing this gruesome scene, he recognized one of the Haight daughters from a previous investigation into abuse. And this is when we find out that 17-year-old Macy Haight had been trying to alert the authorities to her father's escalating abuse and violence for years. On December 8th, 2022, just like a month before this happened, DCFS received a report from Macy accusing her father of abuse. And apparently the police talked to Glenn Stockton from DCFS, who said he had talked to Macy at school, and then he basically closed the case, determining that Macy had no new information, and she was just repeating allegations she'd made against Michael in 2020. So what happened in 2020? Well, on August 27th, 2020, when Macy was 14, a non-family member had called and reported Michael Haight for child abuse. And when police spoke to Macy, she confirmed that there was abuse happening, and it had been going on since 2017. Macy told police that Michael had assaulted her multiple times, including one time where he had choked her so violently she was scared she was going to stop breathing and she would die. When police questioned Michael, he denied assaulting Macy, and he said he had not meant his actions to be violent. However, Macy had been mouthy, and he'd also been having a really hard time that year because of his father's death. For some context, Michael Haight does not have a history of mental illness, but his father did take his own life in 2019. So in 2020, when police responded to these allegations of abuse and they interviewed Michael, they basically told Michael to chill out. They told him his behavior was, quote, close to assaultive. And the report also shows that Tasha had asked the police if she and her family would be safe, and they responded that, there was, quote, no indication there would be any violent behavior on Michael's part, end quote. The officer who spoke to Michael Haight wrote in his report, quote, I advised him that I did not intend to charge him with any crime at this time. I talked to him about the importance of Macy continuing to speak with a therapist. I asked him not to interfere with that. I also advised that he should continue seeing someone about his anger. I advised him that I would much rather be having this conversation with him instead of taking him to jail. End quote. I'll bet that Tasha and her kids would much rather have you have taken him to jail than had a conversation with him. The Utah Division of Child and Family Services took no further action, and the case was closed a few days later with the DCFS report claiming that Macy was safe. Macy called DCFS again in January of 2021, reporting that her father Michael was screaming at her mother while they were all driving in the car on the freeway. Macy said in order to scare and intimidate them all, Michael had swerved the car very hard, causing many of the children to have red marks on their bodies from where the seatbelts had dug into them. Macy said that her father had once grabbed her and basically thrown her head into the hard part of the couch, and he would tower over herself and her siblings, get really close to them in their face, and try to intimidate them. Macy reported, quote, Dad jumps to react to anything he doesn't like. He yells a lot and wants to make sure they know he is right, end quote. The need to be right, the need to control, the literal inability to allow anybody to have a different opinion than you, to feel differently about something than you because you know what's right and you know what's best, and you're going to berate them and do and say whatever you have to until they agree with you or just give in. The report from DCFS was marked unaccepted, and an attached note stated, quote, no disclosure of harm or threatened harm by Macy, end quote. Really? Really, DCFS? After the murders, the Enoch City Police spoke to DCFS, who let them know that Macy had just called again on December 8th, just under a month before her father took her life, and the life of her siblings and the life of her mother and the life of her grandmother. But DCFS said they'd looked into her claims, they talked to her again, and she'd made no new allegations. She was simply repeating what she had told them in 2020. However, this does not align with what DCFS records show. An agent had gone to the house on December 19th, 2022, and talked to Tasha about the allegations that Macy had made, where Macy claimed that Michael had been treating her 7-year-old brother Amon very harshly. Tasha described Michael picking Amon up and throwing him on the ground when the kid didn't want to go to school. Now, at that moment, Tasha said she didn't want to press charges against Michael, and she didn't want DCFS to interview him at that point until he'd been served with the divorce papers. She also said that Michael had threatened to take his own life more than once, which is a manipulation tactic that these narcissistic abusers use, okay, because they know that you're a good person and you don't want anything bad to happen to them. And you also don't want to, have a chance that they could be telling the truth and that they're going to do this. And then that's on you forever. And you'll always feel guilty forever and wish you'd done something, right? So they know you're a good person. They know that's the way you think. And so they are manipulating you and doing that to just try to get you close to them again, to try to pull you back in. Tasha also said that Michael had told her he would make her life a living hell if she tried to leave him. DCFS was like, yeah, that all sounds normal. And they told Tasha to call the police if anything more severe came up, and then they left, and they never interviewed Michael Haight. Domestic violence educator, who was also a rabbi, Avrimi Zippel, said that Macy did everything right. Quote, "If we think about Macy at this point as a victim of child abuse, she really did everything the system asked of her, and now effectively. All she has to show for that is a marble slab over her body with her name on it. History has repeated itself way too many times for us not to realize that people who end up shooting their families usually have these sorts of stories." End quote. And by these sorts of stories, he means a history of being insulting, demeaning, shaming, a history of preventing someone from making their own decisions or from spending time with others, or they'll discourage their family or their wife or their kids from spending time with others. They'll show jealousy that their loved ones are spending time with others. They'll use money or power to exert control. They'll use whatever they have at their disposal in their toolbox to exert control. They have a whole repertoire, and they'll go through all of it. And then once they've exhausted every option of controlling you, then they snap. During the summer of 2022, Macy Haight was reportedly very depressed. It had gotten to the point where, Michael, her father, was not satisfied with anything but straight A's. She was working constantly. She would go to fun activities and bring her homework, and she wouldn't, take part in the activities because she was so busy working, so scared that if she didn't get a good grade, she was going to be yelled at, thrown into the couch again. So Macy's very depressed, and she was laying on the couch with her head in her mother's lap, and Michael came into the room and basically told Macy, get up and go clean your room. And Tasha told Michael to leave them alone. And when recounting this story to a friend later, Macy said, quote, "He looked at me like he hates me. His eyes looked pure evil." End quote. Macy also told her friend that she had a secret phone in her room, a phone she'd been using to record her father in hopes of gathering evidence which could be used against him during the divorce. But just before Christmas, Tasha had discovered the phone and taken it away. We're not sure why Tasha took it away. I think probably because Tasha didn't want Michael to discover that Macy had the phone and then hurt Macy. And Macy wasn't sure where her mother had put this phone. But as far as I'm concerned, at this point in the investigation, at this point in what we've been told through the media, that phone has not been located. There is also evidence that Tasha had gone to LDS leadership several times reporting her concerns about Michael. But it does not seem as if those reports had been passed along to the police, which brings about a whole new set of issues because it seems like everyone knew something bad was going on, but they all put their heads in the sand and hoped it would go away or resolve itself. I actually read this interesting Slate article about this case, this specific case, and there's a writer, Gabrielle Blair, who grew up in a small Mormon town in southern Utah, and she's given her opinion on the role of the LDS Church in all of this. And the article says, quote, "Blair cast blame on the men in charge of the town for not raising flags about Haight's behavior. Blair wrote that she suspected the church leaders, who are all men due to the church's beliefs that only men can be community priests and who interview all active members regularly about their lives, faith, and general well-being, were likewise alerted to complaints either from Haight's children or his wife prior to the divorce. I'm no prophet, but as details have come to light, it turns out my assumptions were exactly right. I am so furious, Blair wrote. So many men knew about this, specific men who had specifically agreed to care for vulnerable people in their community and who had the authority to do something about it. Knew how shitty this guy was, and they did nothing, end quote. And yeah, like there has been reports that LDS leadership was made aware of what was happening. And I mean, like I said, this small community, they all know what's going on. Tasha's been talking to friends. Tasha's been talking to people in the congregation. People knew. And there were red flags, tons of them, even just in the weeks leading up to the murders. On December 22nd, Michael Haight told a friend that he had left his job with Allstate Insurance, and he claimed he'd been fired with cause because the company felt he was fraudulently siphoning funds. Now, according to Michael, he'd already been planning on leaving, and he gave the company his notice that he was going to leave. And then he was like, but am I still going to get my end-of-year bonus? And Allstate was like, yeah, obviously you're going to get your end-of-the-year bonus, but then Allstate was like, oh, we found policy violations in your transactions, so now we're firing you and we're not going to pay you the bonus. And Michael said that this was, an unfair way of being fired, that they had just made this stuff up so they didn't have to pay him, and he was going to get to the bottom of it. A month before that, Michael had told another friend that he didn't really like the direction Allstate was taking because phone calls from his clients were now being transferred to a switchboard, and he didn't feel he could still offer the same level of personalized client care. Michael said he was thinking of starting his own independent insurance agency. Now, the friend that Michael had talked to was also in insurance, and he would later tell the police that if Michael had been fired from Allstate with cause, if he had been doing something nefarious, this termination would be attached to his insurance agent license, and it would be very unlikely that any insurance agency would want to hire him. This friend also said that he and Michael had reviewed Michael's portfolio and discovered that Michael had enough assets to retire and collect several $100,000 a year in, pensions or benefits or whatever, but Michael had rejected this option because he was worried about what it would look like, what people would think about him. A client of Michael's called him on December 23rd. They said, listen, we just purchased a new vehicle. We want to get it insured. We're only going to use you, of course. And Michael said, I'm not with Allstate anymore. And I did sign a non-compete clause with Allstate. However, that non-compete clause is going to be expiring on January 1st, which would have been just like a week after that. And I'm going to, start my own company. So if you could just wait till then to get the insurance, I'll make sure you get the best rate. You know me. I'm going to give you a favorable rate. Michael's friend, who's in the insurance world, said that it was all odd when Michael had told him and others about this non-compete clause, which was allegedly expiring on January 1st, because Allstate would have a standard 1-year non-compete clause policy, not a 2-week policy, not a week policy. Like, nobody had ever heard of such a thing. On December 30th, Michael began making some very telling internet searches, such as, how loud is a 9mm gunshot? What does a gunshot sound like? I heard gunshots near my house. What do I do? If you heard a single gunshot in your neighborhood at night, would you immediately recognize it as such? Would you either way be alerted enough to call the police, or would you chalk it up to just being another sound in the night? How loud is a gunshot in a house? Would a neighbor hear a gunshot in a garage? And how loud is a 40mm pistol? On January 3rd, Michael took his cell phone and began secretly recording himself interacting with his family.
I'm going to play with you. Can I give you a big hug? No?
I'm trapped in here.
How about tickles?
Making plans with his children.
Well, we can go to the mountains maybe tomorrow or the next day.
Hours before police say Michael Haight shot and killed his mother-in-law, Gail Earl, his wife, Tasha.
Do you need my help? You three go in together.
And all 5 of their children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, come here.
Making several secret recordings, Michael first brings up concerns over how much child support he'll have to pay and why he won't move out of the house.
Makes it look like you're abandoning your family. And so that can be an argument used against a parent that leaves.
Tasha telling him if he refuses to move out, she will be forced to go through the legal system.
I'm a little curious why you're so wanting me so aggressively to just move out of here too, and not let the system play out, and why you're feeling like you have to get some motion to remove me from here.
Our kids have mentioned, especially our older 2, have mentioned that when you're here, it is more tense.
I know that right now, they're kind of taking your side. Trying to help provide and trying to be a good husband for you. And I'm sorry I have fallen short in ways.
You do need help. I hope you can get it. I want you to.
Hon, I want it. I've told you.
I deserve to be treated so much better.
In police interviews, friends said Tasha was so proud of finally having the courage to stand up to Michael.
I cannot continue to tolerate the way you have treated me.
Her children saying they were looking forward to having some peace at home.
I'm done.
Without Michael.
You have shut those down every time. So I don't have a voice, Mike. I don't have a voice. I will have freedom now.
Michael says multiple times that he feels like he's being backed into a corner. And he's, I guess, trying to be nice to the kids, and he's making plans with them. He's making plans with them for the next day and the following day and the weekend, and we can go sledding and we can go in the mountains and this and that. But he had no plans on having any of them be alive to do that. Later that day, January 3rd at 9:43 p.m., Michael texted Tasha and asked if they could talk, but she never responded. Now, I assume that he texted her from his basement room while they were still in the same house, because just 5 hours later, all 8 people in that house were dead. And to add insult to injury, a bizarre obituary appeared in the paper for Michael Haight, most likely placed there by one of his family members. I think it was his mom, but just alleged. The obituary speaks incredibly highly of Michael, saying what an amazing husband and father he was, and that each of his children were a truly cherished miracle to him, and how he, quote, made a point to spend quality time with each and every one of his children. Michael enjoyed making memories with the family, end quote. And it goes on and on like this. A stand-up family man, a pillar of his community, a man who devoted his life to service, who devoted his life to his family, who loved his family more than anything in this world. But it fails to mention that Michael Haight annihilated his entire family. And then the comments underneath it, they kind of got even worse. Someone named Julie, who said she's a family member of Michael's, wrote, quote, Michael and his family will be greatly missed. He was always quick with a smile and a kind word. He went out of his way to help and serve others. He loved his family and was proud of them. He took the time to show people that he loved them by serving them. Michael was funny. I don't think I'll ever forget the time we visited the cowboy ghost town and Michael decided to be the wife in the cutouts. Hilarious. I'm grateful for his example of Christ-like love and service, his life and his friendship. End quote. His example of Christ-like love and service, if that's an example of Christ-like love and service, I don't want it. I don't want it. Here's another one. Quote, Michael was a great guy, our third cousin and insurance agent. He will be missed. We are saddened to lose a family member. End quote. So yeah, those were all bad takes. I kind of feel like you lose the right to have a nice obituary when you take out your entire family because you're a baby bitch boy who couldn't handle or regulate his emotions, who couldn't handle the loss of control over people who were never yours to control in the first place. And we have a lot of red flags with Michael, where he was going, why this was escalating. Like, don't get me wrong. I understand that things aren't black and white. I understand complexities in people. Would I sit here in front of you and tell you without the shadow of a doubt that Michael did not love his family, did not love his wife, did not love his kids? No, I think he did. I think that he loved the way he was taught to love. I think he loved the way that the only way he knew how to love, right? Love is different based on who you're talking to. And that's why it's always important to get into a relationship. You have to ask, what's your definition of love? What do you think love is? That's important to ask somebody because love is not one thing. There's not a definition for it. It's such an intangible, hard to pin down kind of feeling, emotion. What is it? Is it a feeling? Is it an emotion? Is it a state of being? What is it? I think he loved them. I think he thought he loved them. And I think more importantly, he probably connects possessiveness and control to love. If they obey me, if they do what I want, if they are beautiful representations of me, I love them. So there was a lot going on with Michael Haight that probably escalated everything, that made him a bomb ready to go off. His father had recently taken his own life. Admittedly, that has to be incredibly difficult. Reportedly, Michael's brother was also going through a divorce, and that was tough for him. Michael himself had just been served with divorce papers. He lost his job, probably wouldn't get hired by anybody else. And in general, Michael had a history of controlling and entitled behavior. He viewed his wife and children as an extension of himself. They were not their own independent entities who would be allowed to have different thoughts or do things differently than he would. Macy Haight was 17. She was going to be graduating from high school this fall, and then she planned on going to Southern Utah University in the fall to pursue a degree in digital marketing. Macy was also a huge help to her mother, Tasha, when it came to the younger kids. She helped the kids with their homework and chores. She got them ready for bed, and she protected them from their father and from the conflict in the household as much as she could. 12-year-old Briley was known to be thoughtful, tender-hearted, sensitive. She loved music, and she was always singing or humming or playing the piano or the cello, just constantly music all the time. And she loved to read. And Briley was known to kind of just always want to talk about what she was reading and also give people recommendations for what books they should read. 7-year-old twins Aman and Sienna were fun-loving, right? Fun-loving little kids, 7 years old. Sienna loved taking pictures and putting funny filters on them, just like my 6-year-old Bella. And Aman loved trains and Legos. He just completed the Titanic Lego set right before he was murdered. And 4-year-old Gavin was mischievous with the best smile. He gave the best hugs. He loved to tickle and be tickled, and he loved being right in the thick of whatever's going on. He didn't want to miss out on anything. Tasha was a lot like her mother, Gail. These women were friendly, outgoing, kind to others. Tasha was always on hand with a loaf of freshly baked bread. If a friend or a neighbor was having a bad day and needed a little extra TLC, one of Gail's family members, I believe one of her kids and one of Tasha's siblings, said their house was always full of music because Gail was a piano teacher and she was always playing the piano, and she would play the piano for her children and her late husband for hours, and they would all sit there and read and just enjoy being together. And now all of these beautiful people are gone because one person who couldn't function in a world where he didn't get his way every second snapped and would have rather destroyed what he loved than to see them thrive and flourish without him. According to a database compiled by USA Today, the Associated Press, and Northeastern University, there have been 30 mass family killings in the United States over the last 2 years. One has happened nearly every 3.5 weeks on average for the last 2 decades. In fact, despite what popular belief is, family killings are the most common type of mass killing, making up 45% of the 415 mass shootings since 2006. Even though these types of murders don't get as much airtime or national attention, they are actually twice as likely to happen as a mass killing where members of the public are targeted. James Allen Fox, a criminologist at Northeastern University, he's studied these types of crimes for decades, and he says that most of them fall into 2 categories. 1, murder by proxy, which means the killer is motivated by anger or resentment and kills the children who are seen to be an extension of their partner. 2, suicide by proxy, which is motivated by despondency or depression. Most often a job loss is involved, a loss of some kind, and the assailant kills the children as an extension of himself, sort of like, I don't want you to have to live in this cruel, cruel world. So what was Michael's motive? Why did he do this? I think the former, the murder by proxy, he seemed to have a lot of resentment. I mean, just the fact that the suicide note had no apologies, not like, I didn't have to do this, or I know I made mistakes, none of that, no accountability. That's kind of where I'm feeling his motive lies in just like killing them because they didn't do what he wanted. But at the end of the day, we have to protect ourselves, right? Because obviously you can't rely on the police or even social services to have your back. Because if a man isn't beating the shit out of you, authorities don't really take it seriously. But any man who's cornered or who has his back to the wall, as Michael said multiple times, can be dangerous, even if they haven't been physically violent in the past. That's the thing. You don't know. It's such an overlooked sort of importance of mental health within men. Specifically, men should be getting mental health help constantly. They should be in therapy constantly. It should be mandatory for men because they have so much going on inside. They have so much, hormones and different things, and they feel like they're responsible for all of these things, and they can get toxic, okay? They need to be humbled. They need to be brought back. They need to be reminded of what's important. They need to be reminded that taking care of your family doesn't necessarily mean paying the bills or making sure they have food on the table. It also means loving them, teaching them, making them strong, making them feel safe. That is what a man does. A real man makes his family feel safe, cared for, and happy. The fact that these types of killings are so common lets me know and I think others, that there's something wrong in society lately, right? There's a lack of community. There's a lack of community resources. People would rather gossip about each other than help each other. People have become cruel to each other. People have become uncaring. People have become selfish, turned inward. I can't worry about what's going on over there because I got to worry about what's going on over here because everyone's got their own problems. And it's just very sad. Sometimes you have to just accept in this day and age that you're on your own and you have to do what you can. The police didn't do anything. DCFS didn't do anything. They should have. I am sure that many senior members of the LDS Church in this area could have and should have done something, but it doesn't appear that they did. So what does that mean at the end of the day? Hopefully you have a support system. Hopefully you have people who are there to help you and will give you resources and give you a safe place to be. But if you don't, and if you're going through all the right avenues and no one's helping, if you don't have any help, you've got to take matters into your own hands. You've got to learn how to protect yourself. You've got to be kind of underhanded, get things lined up, save money, whatever money you can stow away. Message me if you need help. Email me, stephanieharlowe at stephanieharlowe.com. I'll do what I can for you. But sometimes we just have to admit and accept that we're on our own and nobody's coming to fly in and save us. But we still can't just allow ourselves to be in positions where we're victimized every single day. And when you look at the question of, I can either be in this relationship or I can be happy, that's a clear-cut sign, right? When you ask yourself that question, like, I can stay in this marriage, but I'm going to always have to be constantly managing his emotions, managing my expectations. I'm going to have to always be constantly controlling our environment to make sure nothing sets him off. I'm going to always have to constantly be worried and wake up every morning wondering, how is today going to go? Or I can be happy alone. I think that the choice is pretty clear and is pretty evident. So that is where I will leave you. Let me know what you think about this case in the comment section. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I'll see you very soon.
Straight down, and that river runs deep. The mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name. Better say I Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings.